Watergate, the scandal that toppled a president. The burglary that changed history. It was a humid June dawn in Washington, D.C., 1972. On the 6th floor of the Watergate complex, 5 men dressed in dark suits moved stealthily among the offices of the Democratic National Committee. They wore surgical gloves, carried photographic cameras and sophisticated listening equipment. They weren't common thieves. They were spies of the highest level, executing an operation that would forever change American political history. Security guard Frank Wills was making his nightly rounds when he noticed something strange. Several doors had their locks covered with adhesive tape to prevent them from automatically closing. His instinct told him something wasn't right. He called the police. At 2:30 in the morning, officers arrived at the building. They went up to the 6th floor and found the 5 intruders hiding among the desks. They arrested them immediately. It seemed like a minor case, just another burglary in a big city. No one imagined they had just discovered the thread that, when pulled, would unravel Richard Nixon's entire presidency. The men in the shadows. The 5 detainees were not common criminals. James McCord, the group's leader, was a former CIA agent and worked as security chief for President Nixon's re-election committee. The other 4 were Cuban exiles with intelligence connections. When police searched their belongings, they found bundles of new bills, phone numbers that connected directly to the White House, and espionage equipment that could only be obtained in the highest government circles. In their pockets was an address book with the name Howard Hunt and the notation WH, White House. Hunt was a CIA veteran who worked as a special consultant to President Nixon. Another name quickly appeared in the investigation. Gordon Liddy, a lawyer who was part of Nixon's campaign team. The White House's official story was immediate and categorical. It was an independent operation by some lunatics. Presidential spokesman Ron Ziegler dismissively described it as a third-rate burglary. Nixon himself declared that no one in his administration had been involved in this strange Watergate thing. But 2 young reporters from the Washington Post weren't convinced. The truth hunters. Bob Woodward was barely 28 years old and had only been working at the Washington Post for 9 months. Carl Bernstein, also 28, was known for his aggressive style and his ability to get information where others couldn't. Their editors didn't expect much when they assigned them the case. After all, it was just a burglary. The reporters began pulling at the thread. They discovered that James McCord had deposited a $25,000 check in his bank account, money that came directly from Nixon's re-election campaign. It wasn't personal money. It was campaign money used for clandestine operations. Woodward had a very special contact, someone he had known since his days in the Navy, and who now worked in the highest spheres of government. They met in underground garages in the early hours of the morning. This mysterious informant, whom they called Deep Throat, would confirm or deny information, but never lied. With gestures, signals, and cryptic phrases, he guided them toward the truth. Follow the money, Deep Throat told them in one of their clandestine meetings. It was all they needed to know. the corruption network. Following the money trail, Woodward and Bernstein discovered a massive political espionage operation. It wasn't just the Watergate burglary. It was an entire network of illegal activities that came directly from the White House. There was a secret group called the Plumbers, because their job was to stop leaks of information, led by Howard Hunt and Gordon Liddy. This group had carried out multiple operations. They had illegally entered the office of Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist, the man who had leaked the Pentagon Papers. They had wiretapped phones, and they had planned sabotage operations against Nixon's political opponents. The money for these operations came from a secret safe in the White House, controlled by H.R. Haldeman, Nixon's chief of staff. There were checks from Mexican donors that were laundered through Miami banks, illegal corporate funds, and a complex financial network designed to hide the origin of the money. Every week, the reporters published new revelations. Each article brought the investigation one step closer to the Oval Office. The pressure on the White House grew day by day. The resistance of power. Nixon and his inner circle didn't sit idly by. They launched a systematic campaign to discredit the Washington Post reporters. They accused them of inventing sources, of having a political agenda, of serving the Democrats. John Mitchell, former Attorney General and Nixon's campaign director, personally called Katharine Graham, the Washington Post editor, to threaten her. Katie Graham's gonna get her tit caught in a big fat ringer if that's published. Graham, one of the most powerful women in American journalism, didn't flinch. Publish it, she told her editors. The White House also tried to use its influence to pressure other media. They threatened to revoke television licenses from stations owned by the Washington Post. They used economic pressure, legal intimidation, and even espionage against the reporters themselves. But Woodward and Bernstein had something their pursuers didn't expect. The truth, meticulously documented and verified. The collapse. In April 1973, less than a year after the burglary, Nixon's defenses began to collapse. John Dean, the White House lawyer, realized he was going to be the scapegoat and decided to cooperate with investigators. His testimony was devastating. Dean revealed that he had discussed the Watergate cover-up directly with the president, not once but multiple times. He spoke of hush money payments to the burglars, of pressuring the CIA to interfere with the FBI investigation, of a conspiracy that reached Nixon himself. But Dean had no physical evidence. It was his word against that of the President of the United States. The investigation needed something more solid. Then came the testimony that changed everything. Alexander Butterfield, a former White House assistant, casually revealed during a Senate hearing that Nixon recorded all conversations in the Oval Office. There was a secret recording system that had been operating for years. If the tapes existed, they would contain definitive proof of what the president knew and when he knew it. The battle for the tapes. Nixon flatly refused to turn over the tapes. He argued they were protected by executive privilege, the doctrine that allows the president to keep his conversations private. It was an unprecedented constitutional battle. Could the judiciary force the president to turn over evidence that could incriminate him? Archibald Cox, the special prosecutor appointed to investigate Watergate, raised the stakes. He issued a court order demanding that Nixon turn over the tapes. Nixon responded with a maneuver that nearly ended American democracy. On October 20, 1973, in what became known as the Saturday Night Massacre, Nixon ordered Attorney General Elliot Richardson to fire Cox. Richardson refused and resigned. Nixon then ordered Deputy Attorney General William Ruckelshaus to do it. Ruckelshaus also refused and resigned. Finally, the third in line, Robert Bork, carried out the order and fired Cox. The public reaction was immediate and fierce. Calls for Nixon's impeachment collapsed congressional phone lines. The entire country realized that their president was willing to destroy the rule of law to save himself. The moment of truth. Under unsustainable political pressure, Nixon had to appoint a new special prosecutor, Leon Jaworski. At the same time, the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case about the tapes. In July 1974, in a historic unanimous decision, United States versus Nixon, the court ordered the president to turn over the tapes. Not even executive privilege could be above justice. The tapes were devastating. A conversation from June 23, 1972, just 6 days after the burglary, showed Nixon discussing how to use the CIA to block the FBI investigation. It was the smoking gun that proved the president had participated in the cover-up from the beginning. But there was something even more damaging to Nixon. A recording from June 21 had 18.5 minutes of silence. The White House claimed it had been an accidental error by Nixon's secretary, Rosemary Woods. No one believed them. The deliberate erasure of evidence was obstruction of justice as clear as day. The end of the road. On July 27, 1974, the House Judiciary Committee approved the first article of impeachment against Nixon for obstruction of justice. 2 days later, they approved a second article for abuse of power, and a third for contempt of Congress. Nixon knew it was the end. His own Republican allies told him he didn't have enough votes in the Senate to avoid being removed from office. Senator Barry Goldwater, a conservative legend, was brutal in his assessment. "Dan, there aren't the votes. Maybe you have 5 votes, but no more." On August 8, 1974, Nixon addressed the nation on television. With a broken voice and a lost look, he announced his resignation. "I have never been a quitter," he said, "but I no longer have the political support in Congress that I consider necessary to continue." The next day, he boarded the presidential helicopter for the last time. From the door, with his arms raised in his characteristic victory gesture, he waved to the crowd. But he was no longer president. Richard Nixon became the first president in American history to resign from office. The consequences. Gerald Ford, the new president, pardoned Nixon a month later, generating new controversy. "Our long national nightmare is over," declared Ford. But for many Americans, The presidential pardon was a betrayal of justice. Watergate forever changed the relationship between citizens and their government. Trust in political institutions collapsed and never fully recovered. Investigative journalism reached its moment of greatest glory. Woodward and Bernstein became national heroes and won the Pulitzer Prize. But perhaps the most important legacy of Watergate was the demonstration that in a democracy, no one is above the law. Not even the president. The eternal lesson. More than 50 years later, Watergate remains the measure of all political scandals. When something big is uncovered, they inevitably add the suffix, "gate." But Watergate's true legacy isn't in the scandals that came after, but in the lesson it taught about the importance of a free press, judicial independence, and civic courage. Frank Wills, the security guard who discovered the tape on the doors, died in poverty and anonymity. Woodward and Bernstein became journalism legends. Nixon spent the rest of his life trying to rehabilitate his image. Deep Throat kept his identity secret for more than 30 years, until in 2005 it was revealed that he was Mark Felt, former FBI Associate Director. But the story of Watergate isn't really about any of them. It's about the idea that truth eventually always comes to light. It's about the importance of asking difficult questions, of following the money, and of never accepting easy answers when something doesn't make sense. It is, in the end, the story of how a democracy saved itself. Democracy dies in darkness, but not when there are journalists willing to turn on the light. Washington Post motto.